Juggalos. Hi there, Brett McKay from theartofmanliness.com. Since starting The Art of Manliness nearly 6 years ago, I've interacted with thousands of men from all over the world. And one thing that I've learned over the years is that many grown men out there simply don't feel like men. Now, I'm not talking about feeling like a man in the cartoonish, hyper-masculine sense. Rather, I'm talking about feeling like a man, in the sense of that quiet confidence that comes from moving from boyhood into mature masculinity. Many of the guys I've talked to, particularly the ones in their 20s and 30s, have confessed to me that they still feel like a teenage boy, except now they're just walking around in a grown man's body. Because they don't feel like mature men, many of these young men are putting off adult responsibilities like careers, families, and civic involvement until they can look at themselves in the mirror and say, I'm a man. In the meantime, these young men drift insecurely through life, wondering when they'll finally start feeling like grown men. Now, these young men feel lost because they're following modern conventional wisdom on how a person becomes who they want to be. Conventional wisdom tells us that before we do something, we first need to feel like doing it or feel like the kind of person who would do that sort of thing. Doing otherwise would be inauthentic or something like that. And in order to feel like doing something, so the thinking goes, you need to get yourself in the right mindset, or go off and find yourself, or discover your deep inner truth, or some other woo-woo thing like that. So young men, following conventional wisdom, drift through life waiting until they feel like a man before they take their place in the circle of men. They believe at some magical moment in the future, they'll suddenly feel like a grown man, and once that happens, they'll finally have the motivation to start doing manly things. But the problem with conventional wisdom on how a person becomes is that it doesn't work, at least not very well. 9 times out of 10, you won't magically start feeling like a man by simply thinking about becoming a man. So how can you start feeling like the man you've always wanted to be? By following the advice given by both ancient philosophers and modern psychologists. To feel like a man, you have to act like a man. Several ancient cultures and religions taught that the way to belief and personal identity was not through contemplation, but rather through action. They understood the power that our outward actions have on our inner psyche. Here's an example. According to the Torah, when Moses stood atop Mount Sinai and presented his people the stone tablets with the law of Jehovah inscribed upon them, the Hebrews spoke in unison, and I'm probably going to butcher this, Naseh v'nishma, which means we will do and we will understand. Basically, the Hebrews covenanted that they would live the law first in the hope that through living the law, they would eventually come to understand it. Today, this statement represents a Jewish person's commitment to live all the law of Moses, even if they don't fully understand the reasons behind each commandment. Modern rabbis teach that Naseh v'nishma is how one comes to understand God and his laws for man. By living the outward ordinances, a change happens within. The Greek philosopher Aristotle taught something similar in his Nicomachean Ethics. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle lays out his idea of the good life and how to obtain it. For Aristotle, the good life meant living a life of virtue, and unlike some Greek philosophers who believed that virtuous living came only from pondering upon the virtues, Aristotle believed that understanding wasn't enough. To become virtuous, you had to act virtuous. He said this on the topic, but the virtues we get by first exercising them, as also happens in the case of the arts as well. For the things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. For example, men become builders by building, and lyre players by playing the lyre. So too we become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, brave by doing brave acts. Virtues don't come through simply thinking about them. You have to exercise them. And Aristotle's promise is this: if you want a virtue, act as if you already have it, and then it will be yours. Change comes through action. Act first, then become. The patron saint of manliness, Teddy Roosevelt, also lived by this principle of acting in order to become. He said this on the topic: there were all kinds of things I was afraid of at first, ranging from grizzly bears to mean horses and gunfighters. But by acting as if I was not afraid, I gradually ceased to be afraid. Thanks, Teddy. Teddy wanted to be fearless even though he wasn't. Instead of sitting around and thinking his way into courage, TR put himself into dangerous and uncomfortable situations and acted courageously. Eventually, he became the man who led the charge up San Juan Hill and journeyed down an unexplored river in the Amazon. Roosevelt took action in order to become the man he wanted to be. Modern psychologists have a theory on why acting to become is such an effective way of changing who you are and how you feel about yourself. It's called cognitive dissonance. When there's a conflict between your self-perception and how you're actually behaving, you experience dissonance or tension in your brain. And your brain doesn't like that. And so your brain moves to close the gap by shifting how you feel about yourself to match how you're acting. So here's the bottom line. If you don't feel like a man, you simply need to start behaving like the man you want to become and eventually just start feeling like you're that man. Act as if. Fake it until you make it. Your brain will eventually align your attitude and beliefs about yourself with your new behavior. If you're ready to start feeling like the man you've always wanted to be, today's the day you begin that journey. Like any journey, it's nice to have a map. So here you go. Step 1, figure out what sort of man you want to be. Healthy contemplation is still part of the equation here. After all, it's not enough to know you need to act, you also need to know what actions to take. What should we start doing? Where do we hope our actions will lead us? So begin at the end. Ask yourself, what sort of man do you want to become? Maybe you have a personal hero or a grandfather or a mentor who personifies your ideal version of manhood. Once you know what kind of man you want to be, study and contemplate how that sort of man would live his life. What would his daily routine be like? How would he dress? How does he treat a significant other? So on and so forth. Step 2, start doing the things that sort of man would do, even if you don't feel like it. Once you know what sort of things your ideal man would do, start doing them. And here's the most important part. Do them even if you don't feel like it. Some of the stuff you'll have to do will be hard, some of it will make you feel uncomfortable or awkward, and some of it will make you feel like a phony. Ignore those feelings. That's just what author Steven Pressfield would call the resistance. Know that with time, your new manful actions will transform the way you feel about yourself. You will begin to see yourself as a man. Step 3, Weirdial Agitor for the rest of your life. Even when you go through a rite of passage that really transforms you and puts you on the right path, you can't rest on your laurels. Becoming a man is not a one-time decision or event. It's something you have to choose every day. In fact, becoming a man is a lot like shaving. Just because you do it once doesn't mean you're done. You still have to wake up and do it again in the morning, unless you're growing a beard. Weirdial Agitor is a Latin phrase which means the manly thing is being done. Is being done. Always and forever ongoing. Take that as your motto for manhood, and I promise you as you start acting like a man, you're gonna feel like a man. Until next time, this is Brett McKay telling you to stay manly.